Good afternoon, members, and welcome to this overview and scrutiny board meeting of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. Can I also give a warm welcome to any residents and members of the press that may be watching this afternoon. My name is Councillor Steve Bartlett. I'm the chairman of this board, and I'd just like now to hand over to Chris Harrod, who's our Democratic Services Officer, who'll be taking care of the meeting administration this afternoon. Thank you, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Again, good afternoon to all present, and just some housekeeping. So please note this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast, will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure that the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the chairman. Always turn on your video function when invited to speak. Please state your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Some people may need to dial into the meeting and will therefore not have the benefit of the visual. Mute your microphone when you are not speaking. If you would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. The messaging bar should not be used unless you are raising a point of order or providing the wording for an amendment or a motion. Please remember that this panel is visible to all and is subject to public information requests. If at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise your hand feature again. And if a vote is required on any item, Democratic Services will call out each board member's name beginning with the chairman and vice chairman, and please respond with for, against or abstain. Finally, please ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So agenda item 1, apologies. Do you have any apologies, please, Chris?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Rigby, which then takes you on to agenda item 2, substitutes. You have Councillor Kieran Wilson subbing for Councillor Chris Rigby. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and a warm welcome to Councillor Wilson this afternoon and this evening, I understand also. Okay, agenda item 3, declarations of interest, and I will kick this one off in respect of agenda item 8, which is scrutiny of leisure and culture related cabinet reports. I have a local interest in that I'm a director of BH Live and also a director of BH Live Enterprises Limited. Thank you, Chris. Are there any other declarations? I see that Councillor Vicky Slade has got a hand up. Thank you.
Thank you. Same agenda item. I have a local interest in that I'm a member of Poole Sports Trust and is it Poole Sports Trust, Poole Council, but also my husband works at St Aldham's Academy, which is obviously going to be a beneficiary of the work under item 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Councillor Edwards?
Yes, same agenda item. I too am a director of the BH Live Enterprises Board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Millie Earle.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a director, but I am a member of Everyone Active.
Thank you very much.
You're on mute, Chair.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my hand up indication. So Max, you may just like to keep a close eye on this for a while. Thank you. So agenda item 4, referring to the minutes of the last meeting held on the 1st of March 2021. I'd like to ask if there are any changes or if everybody's happy with the minutes. Could I ask for your acceptance of those minutes? If there's any dissent, please put your hand up. Okay, there's not. There is an answer associated with the minutes, which I'm just going to go through. There are a couple of outstanding actions from the meeting on the 1st of February. One was in response to a question regarding the large areas of the seafront set aside for storage and what was being done with these as they seem to increase in size. The portfolio holder advised that he was meeting with the Director of Destination Culture and would raise this issue and provide a response. And also associated with that, the council asked if what work could be undertaken to make the storage compounds look more attractive, and the portfolio holder agreed to also to feed back on that. And I've received an answer from that this afternoon, which is as follows, which will circulate after the meeting. The vehicles at the Durley site are working on the Environmental Innovation Hub project. Towards the end of May, construction will be paused and these vehicles will be taken away from the seafront until the autumn. The East Cliff site will be a collection and transfer station for beach waste over June to August. We accept there is a larger than desirable number of vehicles, but officers are working to keep beach users' disruption to a minimum whilst keeping essential operations going. In regards to the attractiveness of the compound, work has been underway to install more permanent fencing, which is slightly better to look at, to relocate the storage containers on site and to paint the containers to make them more presentable. Officers have reported that the work is nearing completion. There was also a question that came out of our last meeting regarding a query was raised regarding the redevelopment of the Bath Road car park. The portfolio holder undertook to look into this, and I received an answer as follows. The scheme in outline was presented a few years ago, known as Pavilion Gardens. It involved Bath Road North and South sites and the development of cultural and leisure facilities, workspaces and a theatre. The scheme hasn't been advanced since that time, owing to resources and capital being prioritised elsewhere. However, it remains an option, potentially to be brought back within the council's thinking to develop our resort and cultural spaces. Thank you. And I believe there was just one more, which was regarding the forward plan, which regarded a board member suggested they would like the council to develop a plan for how Pool Quay could be improved and brought up to the level of quality for a tourism asset. Chairman suggested that this could be considered further at the next meeting. We will be discussing the forward plan this evening, and that's when we'll discuss it. For the time being, I think those actions are basically closed down, pending our discussion on the Pool Quay issue this evening. So, we now come on to agenda item number 5, which are public issues. Chris, Harrod, are there any public issues that you're aware of, please?
Nothing has been raised against myself, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 6, scrutiny of planning-related cabinet reports. And the report that we're looking at today is the future of planning in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. I'm going to call upon our councillor Philip Broadhead, who's the Deputy Leader of the Council and also the portfolio holder for regeneration, economy and strategic planning, to introduce the paper to us. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for having me again today. I'll do a brief introduction of this paper. Colleagues will remember that I think only in the last Cabinet we brought forward a paper which was around the future of regeneration across Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, and that very much looked at some of the challenges that we faced in that particular area, some of the opportunities that were presenting themselves as we try and be bigger and bolder with our ambition, and then beginnings of how we rise to those challenges and fix that area into the future. This is a continuation of that theme, and this time looking at the planning function that we have and doing very much the same thing, having frankly a bit of humility and looking at how the function has been performing in the recent past. And I think it's, we'll go on to it in a moment, but I think it's safe to say we've had some very, very significant challenges and failures in that area. to talk about how we are managing those challenges at the moment and largely trying to do a short-term fix on some of those, but much more importantly, and hence the reason why it's in the title, how we therefore tackle those challenges head on and look at the huge opportunities we have across the whole of the enhanced area of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, and make sure that we have a planning function that is not only fit for the 21st century, but also fit for the level of ambition, scale and pace that we have in the future, and meeting that challenge head on so that we don't just have a good planning service, but we have an exceptional planning service in the future. And that's very much what my drive is and what my intention is, and we're spelling out in this paper how already we're putting the functions in place to achieve that. So the paper is broadly split into those three areas, and as I hinted, I think it's no big secret, and it's been talked about previously at Overview and Scrutiny, that the planning function has had some significant challenges lately, and there's lots of different reasons why. The most probably pertinent of which is that we still have a situation whereby we are operating three different planning systems, which impacts across the function in so many different ways, clearly in terms of efficiency and resilience, and the reason that those in particular are affected by that structure is that you have a situation whereby if one part of the conurbation has capacity, if officers are very much only divided into the silos of where their area is, there's absolutely no flexibility in the system at all, and quite clearly if you've got one system, having three different parts of it is never the solution. And so that has been a significant challenge, which has been carrying on to when I inherited the portfolio back in October. We continue to have been struggling with vacant posts as well, which clearly obviously affects on how the function can perform. And also quite interestingly and probably quite positively, there has been a not insignificant rise in the number of works and inquiries and planning applications that have come through the system. Partly due to COVID, and as it spells out in the report, there was we've had one of the highest increases in the country in planning applications, a lot of them smaller scale applications, home improvements and things that have come through probably because of COVID. But also we are, as both through our own ambitions and certainly outside, we're seeing an increase in the major applications coming through as well, which again is great news. It shows that there's positivity and investment in our area. But it's not great news if we're not dealing with it properly, and major applications are very complex, require a lot of resource, and we need to make sure that we can tackle them appropriately. So looking at how the performance has been in the past, and you can see in the table that's under item 6, you can see that when I took on the portfolio in Q3, we got to quite a worrying position whereby taking the major applications, for example, only 63 of those were being decided within the adequate time frame, and there had been a significant downward trend across the other areas as well, and that's clearly not good enough. And actually, even more worrying, you can get to a level whereby you don't meet the government threshold, and then you start to really concern. So it's been really clear, quite aside from the fact that we want to have a much bigger, much more impactful planning service, that it's just not good enough as it has been. I think we need to have some humility about that. So that's the kind of past. So I suppose the big question is, well, what do you do about it? Well, first of all, in conjunction with the Chief Executive, we set up a Planning Improvement Board, and that board was chaired by the Chief Executive with myself and a number of others on to look at, in the very, very short term, how we can fix this. And that work has been underway and has already started to come through the system. You can see on that aforementioned table in item 7 that we've seen a significant uptick in terms of the number of applications that are now being decided in time, and slightly more informally as well. I'm hearing from a number of people that they're really starting to feel more positively about how the situation is being handled. And look, I mean, part of that is getting to grips with it. Part of it is, as there has been this change in working practices through COVID, and we're getting used to it more as well. Clearly, that helps as well. So we've had the Planning Improvement Board that has been looking at addressing that. And then at the same time, we've been looking at setting up the function for the future. One of the things that I said right at the beginning was that I think it would be an absolute wasted effort if we put together the functions for the new planning system in the future, but then we were still left with what we've inherited, which is a very significant backlog and some significant issues. So we've been addressing that backlog so that we've very much got a blank slate as we come through with this new function that will be coming through by the summertime. And that includes things like extra immediate resources and interim appointments so that we can get that staff level up to decrease the backlog. We've also looked at more innovative solutions, so you can actually, other planning authorities around the country can take a number of caseloads off you, particularly the minor ones, the very uncontentious ones, and we've employed that technique as well in a number of other ways to make sure that as we move forward to the new system, we're not starting with one hand behind our back. So then moving through to the future, and it's very much, the big answer is addressing the very big problem, which is the fact that getting rid of having 3 separate planning functions and having one unified planning function straight away. And the quicker we can do that, the quicker we can get all of the benefits of efficiency, but also the quicker we can start acting like one council. So we are the first director that will be going through the Smarter Structures programme, which is a corporate-wide effort to completely look at how we redo how the corporate mechanisms. So we're the first on that, and the plan here is that what we're putting into place at the moment is having that one structure and equally having one single administrative ICT structure as well. So having one ICT system. So rather than having to work with different legacy systems, we're able to fix that as well. Significant extra resource is going into the process as well, and I've made very clear to the whole team that good enough isn't good enough. We need to be aspiring to the best planning function in the whole country. There's a lot more detail in the report, Chairman, about a number of the things that we're doing within the core operational sides of the team. And Nick Perrins, who is the head of planning, is on hand here today as well to answer any questions that members may have about the more core operational aspects as well. But it's also clear to me that just fixing the system isn't enough as well. Part of the reason that we've got some of the issues that we have is, as I said earlier on, we've got some major complex applications coming through, including a number of our own. So as part of that fix, we're also including a new major applications team, so a dedicated team of the right people with the right mindset specifically to deal with our major applications. And I'm absolutely convinced that that will be a really positive way that we can unlock a lot of the investment and scale that we want to achieve as well. And then finally, again, a number of the issues that we have in our planning area is that some planning applications are very, very difficult to judge because, frankly, a lot of our planning policies are a little bit all over the place. And we've got some key areas, particularly either areas that are really wrapped up in a lot of heritage or areas that are really ripe for investment, but frankly, our policy ambition isn't matched there, that actually could form a big part of the solution as well, about taking away some of the more subjective parts of planning, bringing those decisions about what those planning policies in those areas should be to the front, which then actually makes, first of all, it unleashes the ambition of what we want these areas to be, but also makes the job of the planning officers and the planning team much more efficient, because if they have clarity over what is and isn't allowed in these areas, clearly that makes the planning process a lot smoother. And that's why we're putting some extra resource into the development briefs as well. And we've highlighted 5 areas to begin with, where what the idea is that we'll be doing a consolidated piece of work to look at key areas and go, right, what should be allowed here, do a development brief for that. That then enters into the planning policy, which should give some real clarity for what development could or couldn't happen in those areas. And to highlight a few of the areas that we're going to be starting with, Westover Road is one example in Bournemouth. It's clearly seen better days, and one could argue is dragging that whole area of the town down. It's also pretty clear that it's got amazing potential, but there is not any clarity at the moment over what could or couldn't be allowed there. I've got a vision that I'd like to see it as more of an alfresco dining zone and maybe bring the road down to 1 lane. That's just my idea. We do need some clarity there. Also in Bournemouth, we've got the area around the former Marks and Spencer's site where we've got some planning applications coming through that at the moment seem to be conflicting with what the extenting planning policy is, and we really need to bottom that out. And then you look at other areas across the conurbation. Poole Quay, which you mentioned earlier on, Chairman, I completely agree. It's an area that has such massive potential. What we need to do is decide what we want to see there, do that as a development brief, enter that into the planning policy, and then we can make sure that we protect our heritage whilst trying to lift the area up. And then a couple of sites in Christchurch as well, not least of which is the Civic Centre site, the former Civic Centre site, which could be a massive, a beautiful site in making most of the river and public realm and all that kind of thing. But again, we need to really bottom out where we are. So that's trying to tackle the other parts of the planning system as well, which is the what do we want. So I'm happy to take any further questions on the paper, but in summary, we've had some real issues. The planning system hasn't been in the place that we want. We've already made significant inroads into fixing it. We've got some very big plans for the future, and I do believe this is only the beginning, but I'm really happy to welcome Nick Perrins here today as well. He'll be able to answer any operational questions that members might have. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Broadhead. Councillor Vicky Slade.
Thank you. I have so many questions, Phil, but that's a good thing, isn't it? Because I'm engaged in the whole thing. First question I have is, are you still going to be here for the update, the member working group update on the local plan? Because if you are, I'll save any comments about that until that bit.
Chairman, I wasn't planning on being here for that. So if there was specific, and it might well be, it was a very positive meeting that covered a lot of details. It might well be that the members of the working party are able to answer specific questions there, but more than happy to field them if you don't think that will be the case. With your permission, Chairman.
I really want to get into this paper specifically.
Okay, so if I won't ask about that, although it's referenced here, and if I don't get the answers I need, then perhaps I'll take them up with Phil later. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Thank you.
No problem. So if I rattle through the questions, and then I'm sure Phil can probably answer some of them together, because they're not complicated. I'm really pleased to see that we've turned the numbers around, because that really was a worry for everyone. So well done to everyone involved in that. One of the things that does bother me slightly, though, is that over a year ago, probably even getting on for 18 months ago, we started talking about these performance measures and how they were going the wrong way, and how if you miss the 80% threshold, it didn't matter whether you missed them by a week or a year, you missed it. And we looked at putting additional tracking measures in so we could see what was the, expecting that maybe 50% of those that missed were agreed or refused within, say, 15 days or 30 days or whatever. So we could see whether there was improvements within the scheme. I can't see any indication that anything's progressed on that, so I'm just interested in that. On the same issue around, I know we were talking again pre-pandemic about changes in terms of process, and it sounds to me as though some work is now going to start with the policy team, which will be done during next financial year. Has no progress been made in terms of changing the processes? Because that feels like a huge, over a year lost with no changes to how we do things. The majors, brilliant. I think it's absolutely necessary that we have a team that are specialists at doing that. But there was some suggestion from some developers that they would be willing to pay, and I'm not passing judgment whether I think this is a good idea or not, because it could potentially be seen as a bit iffy. There was a suggestion they may be willing to pay for a fast track or for a different service from a different team. Can I just ask whether anything has progressed on that? The issues around vacancies, difficulty in filling them, I know that was partly because of benchmarking of salaries against the private sector, and I wondered if that was ever likely to be fixed, or is this problem really going to carry on? And if we're going to send some of our cases elsewhere, which I think sounds very sensible, will public visibility be maintained on the progress of those cases? And is there an unintended consequence of that around those cases if they come to committee, how they're managed if it's been an external planning officer? And the only other thing I really want to say is about enforcement. There's no additional capacity in the enforcement team, and there does seem to be a sense in some areas that some people can get away with anything because no one enforces. If we're not investing more in enforcement, how can we give that assurance to the public?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Okay, Phil, here you go.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the questions. And Councillor Slade will be pleased to know that nearly all of those questions that I've asked myself. So I'll probably have to defer to Nick on some of the more detailed parts of those questions. But I'll start, and then Nick can pick up all the things that I've missed, if that's acceptable with you, Chairman. The progress on processes, of course, and I'm unashamed, and you know me, I'm always looking to the future and the kind of the big fix in the end. And so I will admit it's a character flaw that I often underplay all the work that's been going on to get to the position that we're in now, because I'm always trying to look at what we can do next. But a significant work has been going on through the department already in terms of making sure that there's been progress on those processes, and that's precisely, Councillor Slade, I think, why we've seen already a not insignificant improvement across the area on a number of these things. I'm absolutely convinced that the only way you're going to get the big answer to all of those is to do what we're now unleashing, and it will be in a very short period of time that this comes into fruition properly. One IT system across the whole piece, one system rather than 3 legacy systems in silos, but clearly the processes have progressed already, and that's why we've seen that a very different position from when I came in October to where we are now. It's also worth saying, and I didn't bring it up at the beginning, I'm a data guy, you know me, I love my data, and as part of that planning improvement board process, and actually as part of a much bigger piece on what we're doing corporately, we're putting a lot of time and effort into having real-time data that's accessible, so that you can see when in real time where issues are, how things are going well, how they're not going well, and that will be more widely accessible as well through things like Power BI, which you may be aware of, which is a really good way of bringing all that together. That's currently happening in that planning improvement board, and I think that's better, not just from a scrutiny point of view, but also for the team operationally. If you can see exactly how things are going in real time in a very easy to read way, that is certainly the way to resolve things in the future. I absolutely agree with you on the point about the major applications, and I've had the similar discussions with developers. I think there's a really big capacity for them to they're quite happy to pay more if they get an enhanced service, and it's obviously a quid pro quo, and they'll pay more if there's an uptake in how the function is performing. There is a limit to how much you can charge, so that's part of the fact that we've been looking into that. But that is part of the thinking at the moment. I think one of the things that the experts will tell me, however, is that the real utility doesn't come in the main. Most of it comes in the pre-app stages. And if you can get really engaged and have if developers or whomever gets involved with the pre-application has real faith that that's actually contributing to something, then they'll get involved with it. They'll pay handsomely for it, because actually it then leads to better applications overall. And the aspiration is that if you enter into a pre-app, by the time you then have the confidence to go into a full planning application, everything's out in the open, and the application is significantly improved. Crucially, however, as I've said before, I think that has to involve members as well. And that's why we're bringing forward the revised, what was the member engagement forum, will be major projects forum, whatever we're going to call it. And I think that has to involve members of the planning committee as well, because if members of the planning committee can be involved very early in the process, not in not prejudging, but actually feeding in, and then that way we can get better applications. It's better for developers, it's better for the area. We end up with the right applications, and clearly that will improve the process. Couple that with a crack Navy SEAL team of major planners that we have in our system, and it's hopefully a recipe for massive improvement. I'll leave the questions around salaries and things to Nick. I agree with you about some of the dangers of sending applications out of town. That is not the big fix. That only happens, and Nick may be able to mention more, with almost the bureaucracy of some of the very minor applications. So anything that even had a hint of being able to go to committee would never be handled in that way. But equally, as I'd said at the beginning, I was absolutely determined that if we entered into this new system and we still had a backlog, we'd just be treading water, and that's not a way to handle it. So that's my answers, but Nick may be able to fill in some of the gaps. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Perrin, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the questions, Councillor Slade. Yeah, it's really pleasing the numbers have returned back to a much better position. That's really great, and it's a testament to the team. A lot of hard work, but also, as Councillor Broadhead has mentioned around the process, we have made some changes in process in year to try and drive that change, and the numbers have proven that's working. Things by being more efficient with report writing and sign off and things. So we have made in-year changes, and that's been borne out in the figures. That's really positive. Just on the fast track and the majors, yes, absolutely. This, in the future is where we want to be. I think offering a really engaging service where people will pay for a good service is definitely a good aspiration. It's also related to making sure we're fixing our baseline. So before we offer enhanced services, we need to make sure we can deliver on those services. So part of smarter structures, the systems, setting up new teams, etc. Fix our baseline as best as possible. Once we do that, then build and offer these enhanced services. But we are also already trying to do that on certain major applications where a developer will enter into a planning performance agreement. They're happy to pay money to have dedicated resource. Our relationship with outsourcing companies allows us to bring people in to enable that. So hopefully, before we really get going with our baseline, some of these major projects will go through the system a lot quicker than they have in the past. So we should be seeing the benefits of that in the next financial year. Just on the vacancies and the salaries, yes, you're absolutely right. It's a problem which we need to be aware of, but also as part of smarter structures and the pay and reward project, we hopefully both of those two things together will end up with a position where we attract the best staff. There's also an issue with lack of planners nationally, so we have a sort of an issue about how we grow our own, and maybe we need to get apprentices, and there's a whole sort of people piece we need to do here. But it's definitely an issue we're aware of. We need to make sure we end up with a situation which we can afford, but we also get the vacancies filled, because otherwise we're never going to go anywhere on that front. Just around the outsourcing and the public visibility and committee, just to reassure in terms of how it works, it's not to the company. They kind of almost act as part of the team. So they supply the planning officers, but they have access to the systems. There'll be a named officer on any planning application which is outsourced to the company, and therefore they will interact in the same way as any other customer. So the customer won't see a difference in terms of how that works. And if something does go to planning committee through call-in or whatever reason, then it will just be treated the same. So there won't be any detriment at all on using that. It adds capacity. It's a really hopefully it's going to be a really helpful burst just to get that backlog sorted. But I don't see any issues, hopefully, with public access, visibility, and due process being followed. And ultimately, they'll all be signed off by either planning committee or the senior managers in the planning department, so they won't have autonomy about signing things off themselves. So there's some checks and balances in place.
Can I just come back? Neither of you have mentioned enforcement.
Oh yes, enforcement. Councillor Broadhead, Chairman, you happy for me to answer that?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, again, as part of Smarter Structures project, to make sure that we're having sufficient capacity built into the service. I know it's a difficult one in terms of reduced finances, but yeah, we need to make sure the whole service operates properly. So as part of that project, we're looking at whether we can add capacity or do things differently. But again, we can use external, and we are using some external support to add capacity in the here and now. So it's a very crucial part of the planning service to make sure we're having enforcement operating. And I wouldn't want to see it diminish any further. If anything, we want to try and build it up. We just need to find a way to pay for it. But yeah, it's absolutely on the list, and hopefully smarter structures will address that.
Thank you. Are you happy, Councillor Slade? Thank you. Councillor Wilson, please.
Cheers. Thank you, Chair. It was Councillor Slade's mention of a fast track that kind of made me think of this question. Later on this evening, we're going to scrutinise the report of the homelessness strategy, and in that it states that we have 4,600 homeless applications coming through the council last year, which is a significant amount. And part of that is the fact that we don't have enough affordable housing. And I know in Bristol, well, I know our planning policy is, I think, somewhere around 40% on major developments. 40% should be affordable housing, but we never ever reach that. In Bristol, they have a fast tracking system for those who are 20%, who provide 20% affordable housing on their development, get put through the system quicker. So my question is, would we consider that in terms of fast tracking? And if not, what incentives are we going to do in order to increase affordable housing and try and become compliant with our current policy?
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Chairman. Look, I'm all up for exploring innovative ideas that can both help the aim of making our homes as affordable as possible, and at the same time improving the process and incentivising people. Of course, there is a danger that if you, in order to properly incentivise, then the base level has to be something that you wouldn't wish to aspire to. I'd much rather be in a position that anybody who puts in an application has confidence it's going to be dealt with in a certain amount of time, so you almost wouldn't need that incentive. But I'm happy to take that away and look at it. As to the more strategic, and Nick may well have observations on this as well, as to the kind of more strategic level, which I think we're talking about in terms of affordable homes, well, clearly we're going through the local plan process at the moment, so that's one way to put it into it. And as part of that, we'll be looking at in further detail of how that slots in. We've also got some housing strategy work that is underway, and I think later on this I think it's in summertime, we've got a kind of a major piece of work on the housing strategy that looks at precisely how we wish to take forward some of these points, particularly within council-owned stock as well, and what type of affordable homes we wish to prioritise in the future. So that's kind of more of a strategic part than the actual structure itself. But Nick, do you wish to add anything?
Yeah, go ahead, Nick, please.
Thanks, Chairman. Councillor Broadhead. Yeah, absolutely. Always open for innovation, and I think the model in Bristol is really quite exciting. I think London are also looking at that as well. It's a bit different down here, because usually the problem we have is that the developers start with a benchmark of 40%, and we end up with much lower when we go through the process of viability review. So we don't even get 20%, quite often. So it'd be a bit different if the evidence was showing that in most cases we were getting 20-25%. Then you can make a case, well, actually, let's just save the viability process, because that's what it's doing. It's not fast tracking necessarily the application determination. It's fast or removing the bit about viability review from the process. It inherently speeds it up. So I think for us, we need to also get ourselves into a position where we're achieving much more affordable housing just generally through the system. And if we're doing that, then potentially we can look at fast tracking in different ways. And it also links into local plan. It's very much a policy matter. But yeah, rest assured, we're aware of the innovation, and yeah, we'd like to do something similar where we can.
Thank you very much, Nick. Okay, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think, like, obviously, are there any other solutions or ideas? Probably this is targeted towards Nick more than anything. Other than kind of to get people to comply with, affordable housing.
Can I just come in, Councillor Wilson? We're really interested in understanding what the problems are with the planning system, not necessarily the policies it has to invoke. And I understand your concern about affordable housing, but I really want to get to the bottom of the issues facing the planning department at the moment in terms of, the delays and how they're going to put things right. And before we can really start addressing the effectivity of affordable housing provision, we've really got to get the system in place that's working properly first. So can we just park that for a bit? I think he's given you a reasonable answer. So I'd just like to move on if possible. Thank you. Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A few things. I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Broadhead has said and what Nick Perrins has already said this afternoon with regards to transferring over to one system for the 3 sets of planning officers that we have at the moment. I think that is really essential. If you look at the data that comes out every week on up-to-date planning applications, it's fairly obvious that Bournemouth and Poole have far more to deal with than Christchurch do at the moment. So the unfortunate part of that is, of course, that Christchurch officers can't really access the stuff for Bournemouth and Poole because they're on different systems, so it makes it more difficult. So going to one will, I think, alleviate a lot of those problems in the future, and along with the officers being able to work on all aspects. So I think that's a really good point. I'm wondering, Chairman, with your indulgence, could I ask Mr. Perrins to explain to members on the panel this afternoon that are not necessarily members of Planning Board or may not understand it fully, what we describe as major and minor applications? Because when you look at the chart here, and if you go to Q3, it says major applications, we achieved 63% of those. But some people may wonder what a major application is. I mean, if you take the one that we did at the last Planning Board, Chairman, which was the Merley one, that was for 600 and something houses. Now, that is a major application. And as you well know, it took longer than the standard 13 weeks for that one to be in a sufficient stage for it to come through to Planning Board. So if Nick could explain that to members, just so they know what the difference between a minor, which might be somebody's porch or a garage or something, to the major ones. If I could ask that to be done first, and then I'll come back, if that's okay with you, Chairman.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Councillor Kelsey, one that I was going to raise myself. And for example, if you look at Q3 in target 17 with the total of 21, potentially there you've got 5 major applications, and all of them could be on the scale of the one that we've recently dealt with at Merley. This is a huge issue, and it certainly is for developers. So I think it'd be a very good idea if Mr. Perrins could actually just outline what a major application is, just so we can put this in context. Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like to go ahead, Nick, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Kelsey, for your question. Okay, so a major application in the scope of the legislation is anything of 10 units and above in terms of residential, and anything of 1,000 square metres of commercial or non-residential floor space, or anything over, I think it's a hectare in terms of site size. So if you hit one of those 3 triggers, you're classed as a major application. So you could have 10 flats, or you could have 700 houses, and they're all grouped into the same category. But Councillor Kelsey is absolutely right. There is, even in the major category, there are different scales of major. There's the really significant majors, and then there's the more standard majors. So then, therefore, minor development is basically anything under 10 residential units under those thresholds. But it doesn't include things like household applications and adverts. They're in the other category. So in that table, you've got major, minor, and other. So yeah, you've got the really small scale stuff in the others. You've got small scale dwellings and small scale commercial in the minors, and then you've got the residential above 10 and commercial above 1,000 square metres in the major category, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Perrins. Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Mr. Perrins. Hopefully some people might find that helpful to justify how we do go about these things. Now, one of the other problems is obviously over the last year or two, we've had a lot of developments and applications that have taken a long time to deal with. Now, am I right in saying, and I think I am, that is not always down to the fact that the planning department is slow? I think some developers have to take responsibility for delays in planning applications not being dealt with. Quite often questions will be sent back and forth, and they're not always, returned on a prompt manner, so therefore the delays. But we do have a session where we can agree time extensions, and that has to be dealt with, between all parties, I believe. Is that correct, Mr. Perrins?
You happy for me to come in, Chair?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. Absolutely, Councillor Kelsey. It's a very good point, actually. The planning system is a very complex procedure, and there's a lot of potential delay within it because you've got to rely on a lot of people. It's not a case of the planning officer, progressing things slowly. Quite often there's a lot of waiting around. You're waiting for statutory consultees on complex issues, Natural England Environment Agency. You're waiting for other internal consultees who might have their own resource pressures or issues. But absolutely, you're right. The developer themselves, quite often, not in every case, but sometimes they're quite happy for a bit of delay to allow them time to address issues. It can be quite a finely balanced thing. Sometimes you could just make a decision and move on, but actually there might be scope to work to a resolution, and developers are quite often happy with that. So yeah, it can be quite a complex process. So the numbers They reflect, and that's why the government targets, in some ways, for major applications, they're 60%, because they recognise there, there is complexity within the system, and it's not necessarily around sort of hitting 100%. Obviously, we all want to be much higher than 60%. Everybody wants that, no doubt about it. But it's quite complex, and there's quite a lot of delay just through all the interconnected relationships the planning officer has to deal with.
May I come back, Chairman, please?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Mr. Perrins, for that. Mr. Perrins, on one of the other things that was mentioned by, I think it was Councillor Wilson and things just now about affordable housing. Obviously, with the Merley one, we've just achieved a full 40% affordable housing on that development. That is fantastic news. And obviously, we know that when a lot of developers come in and a lot of planning applications come in, they go to the DVA, district valuers, and they come back as not affordable for affordable housing. Do we ever challenge the DV's statistics? Do we have anyone with the capabilities within planning to challenge them? Because they're not always right. And sometimes I think we bow too much to what they say, rather than just saying, well, actually, you paid that much for the site. The fact that you paid too much for the site and it's no longer worth it or viable in your eyes. Do we have anyone that can actually challenge those? And are we allowed to challenge those notes from the DV?
I could just come in there. I think we could probably spend an hour talking about this one.
Oh, we could.
We could. But we'll give Nick a chance to answer. But do you really want to stick to the paper and the issues?
Yeah, I'm coming round to that now, Chairman.
Okay, go ahead, Nick.
Do you want me to answer quickly, Chair? Or
yes, please. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, the answer is yes. In effect, we do challenge. We don't accept DV's with initial response, and this again comes down to where delay happens in the system, where actually it's definitely worth, or in the council's interests, to challenge views which come from third parties. But yeah, the DV, they're credible. They work in the public interest. But as you say, they have their own view, and we do challenge that when it doesn't look right. We challenge it, and on the back of that, we have got results out of it, and we do have expertise in the service and also the housing service. But again, going forward, it's something for the service to think about. Should we actually have proper chartered surveyors, skilled in viability experience, actually in the service to help us with those conversations? Very much in the future, that's something we should look at.
Thank you, Mr. Perrins. One final section, if I may, Chairman. Within the funding, 50,000 funding that we have, I think my reading through the paperwork was 70,000 for, is it regeneration or something, where it's coming from? I'm just wondering why that 70 grand is coming out of your 250 and not out of the transformation budget.
Do you want to answer that, Councillor Broadhead? I'll
try and find it if I can, but I can't remember where I saw it now.
Nick may well have more detail, although I do. I mean, I'm not obviously the finance guru, but I do know we have earmarked a section, a not insignificant amount of the regeneration budget to tackle this area as well. So I think this 250 is the additional support that we're suggesting here, but Nick may have more further detail, Chairman.
Mr. Perrins.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think you're referring to the transformation money to be spent on transformation, and this is dedicated money to support the planning transformation. So I don't think it's necessarily coming from regeneration. It's the council made it available, and it's focused for transformation work. And I think it's felt just to have capacity built in, to support us with our new systems or our new process. It's money well spent to make sure we actually really get under the skin of the process and we actually deliver transformation. So I think in the overall use of the money, it's a good use of the money. Without it, you're back to a situation where the officers haven't got the capacity to do the operational, but also the transformation work required. So my view, it's well worth the money, and we'll get there a lot quicker in terms of where we want to be by use of that money.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Perrins. Thanks, Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you. I've got. Could you just take your hand down, please, David? Thank you. Councillor O'Neill is next, but before he comes in on his questions, I just wanted to say that I've looked at the report, and you've listed all the difficulties that the planning system is facing at the moment, and they are significant. Make no mistake about that. You know, from staff shortages and IT systems, the delays through COVID and all the rest of it. And there is so much to do. And having been on the planning board for 6 years, I do understand the complexities of what you're up against here, and that's what really worries me, because the areas that you've mentioned about which need to be addressed are so significant. I really cannot see how £250,000 is even going to scratch the surface. It's just a little sticking plaster on which is a major concern. It's particularly when you start, and I have to say, Councillor Broadhead, when you gave your introduction, my concerns started to go up and up and up the more you said, because you were talking about our ambition, bringing, you know, our big plan and everything into this, and yet we're not walking yet. We shouldn't be thinking about running until we can walk. You know, we've got to address these issues. Now, I'm not going to go into them in detail, but some of the queries that leap out of this is how much of the work is going out to is being outsourced. How many staff are we shortage from the staff establishment that we should have? You know, when you think about 250k, how far does that actually go when you're talking about bringing in planning staff? Not very far at all. I don't think that will even scratch the surface of what needs to be done. So having just put that, and I'd be very interested to see what other members have got to think about this, because I personally don't have confidence, having seen this paper, that we really have identified the extent of the problem and what we need to do to fix it. I think it sort of glosses over the issues. And I think having received some feedback from some of our developers who are looking at major schemes, they are very unhappy. And we have to remember that every one developer who has, you know, has got real financial stakes in moving some of these things forward are being hurt. They're being hurt by a lack of ability to manage, you know, the thing in a timely way. And please don't get me wrong, I know how difficult it is, and I don't understate the difficulty that we've had through COVID, and the need, of course, to reorganise ourselves through LGR. That just taking all this on makes life really difficult. And it saddens me too, because not very long ago, I remember the Planning Advisory Service coming down from the LGA telling Bournemouth Council that in their peer review that they did, we were one of the best in the country. And now, you know, I guess we're not. And it does sort of raise the other issue: can we bring in some help to advise us? The Planning Advisory Service would be one of them from the LGA. Anyway, that's enough from me. Could I just?
Thank you, Chairman. It's just for my understanding, we touched on the request for extensions, which have to be agreed by both parties. How many applications are actually decided within a period without any request for extension? Is the first question. The second part of the question is, when I read the local plans, and I've read all three, there is a lot that lacks precision. There are some vague statements. If the local plan is to be consolidated and rewritten, will it be done in such a way that many of the requests for extension might be negated? Thank you.
Phil?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. I don't have the numbers. Mr. Perrins may be able to assist in that. But as you pointed out at the beginning, extensions are they're actually pretty common, and they are only done with the express consent of both parties. And they're really there to enable progress. And as Nick mentioned earlier on, planning applications are extremely complicated. And if you're waiting for further information from your statutory partners and things like that, or if there's clarifications which can make the planning application better, then clearly the applicant, if they didn't want to extend, wouldn't agree to it. So I don't necessarily think it's hugely a barometer of things going wrong, as you'd seem to imply, and Nick may well have more to say about it. I think what I would say in terms of that getting to the position where they weren't necessary, a lot of that, as I intimated earlier on, is this is not just about the planning application process. It's much deeper, isn't it? So first of all, as I said, and I'm absolutely convinced that this is a major issue in the planning system, is the frankly all over the placeness of many of our planning policies, which leads to extremely difficult planning applications, because rather than them being, there's your planning policy, does it match, yes or no, job done, there's, in my view, too much subjectivity in the system, which just makes everything tremendously complicated. Now, the local plan clearly is part of the solution in that, but that's a big bit of work in and of itself, which is why, as I mentioned earlier on, I think getting those planning development briefs to start with in the 5 areas that I mentioned, but I'm of the view that we've got a lot of out-of-date planning policies. We need to be applying more resource, and we will be applying more resource into those areas. It's not dissimilar, and it's been contentious, but the direction that government is coming through with their most recent planning white paper. If you can get have a lot of the arguments, if you like, up front in terms of what an area would or shouldn't like in terms of planning, if you do that and it's clear, then actually the next bit is quite straightforward. So that's one part, but the second part, as well, as I mentioned, is the pre-app process. If we can get to the stage where we have a really positive, engaged and useful pre-application stage, then actually, once again, one would hope that the need for any extensions when you get to the major applications, the main application stage, are largely negated, because you're not trying to do the work that really should have been done in the pre-app, in the kind of the post phase. But I don't know whether Nick wishes to, whether you've got any clarity on the how many are extended, or anything else that I've missed out on, with your permission, Chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't got the exact statistics, but historically, you generally run about 70%, 60 to 70% without extensions of time. That's a ballpark figure. It might have been a bit higher in the last 6 months or so, just due to all the various other complications of COVID. It's also important to say that it's not just a BCP thing. This is something which the entire country, they use this, and it can be quite useful. Sometimes avoids a refusal, which avoids an appeal, and therefore can be more efficient to extend something by a couple of weeks to sort something out. So it's not necessarily the worst tool to use, albeit at the same time we don't really want to use them if we don't have to. And we do want to turn the service into a much more efficient process where we can churn through the decisions where we need to and where we can, without using them. So it's in that ballpark. But again, as Councillor Broadhead said, with information, we're going to be much more outward facing with our statistics, and that will include hopefully a sort of running live total of extensions of time and how many that is, so people can just see that for themselves and comment as required. And on local plan, fully agree. We need to move it forward. We need to avoid the ambiguity, get proper consolidated policies across the conurbation, which will help the whole process just by having that clarity achieved.
If I may comment, Chairman, the reason I ask about extensions is that if we actually examine the extensions, it will tell us what is the natural process of the business, like heritage, etc., and what are the areas that may be a complication in the policy that we can then address in the local plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Broadhead.
Yeah, if I could just come back, and that's a very good point that Councillor O'Neill makes, and it goes back to the point that I said earlier on about having access to as much data as possible as well, so that you don't know. Famous saying, you don't know what you don't know. The amount of time that you're making assumptions, and you can back that up with areas that are performing, even within the system, even within the planning function. How are we doing on dealing with the transportation inquiries? Because we also have to remember, it's not just about the planning function itself. We've got legal, we've got transportation, we've got all of our other partners, as Nick pointed out. And so and that's what that planning improvement board is doing as well. And I would just reiterate that that's been a really, really positive tool to be able to identify areas that we need to improve, so that we can A, deal with it, but B, build it into the new smarter structures part. I just wanted to comment on that as well briefly, if I may, Chairman, and in reference to your comments about your concern. And I've been very open at the beginning that we have to be very honest with ourselves and have some humility, and we have not been in a good place on this area. Now, that is national. A lot of, because of COVID, most authorities have seen a significant dip. But I equally shared your concern in that, as I'd said, good enough is not good enough. We want to be one of the best planning authorities in the country. To be a bit more optimistic than perhaps than you were, from the time that I took on this portfolio, where 60% of major applications were not, according to performance data, being handled on time, by Q4 we were at 90%. So we're already almost at, we're not far away from being 100% done within that time. And that even that was within the old system of frankly being all over the place by having 3 legacy systems. So getting that new system in place with that baseline secured so that we're running it as close to 100% as possible. This 250,000 we're talking about here is additional funding. And as I said earlier on, we've tried to maintain some fluidity in the 500% increase of the regeneration budget as well. That I am actually very confident that as long as we go into, as Nick said earlier on, the baseline position not holding us back, that we can get this right. So yes, it has been in a bad place, but significant progress has been made already. And the final thing to say is that we've now got our strategic implementation partner on board as part of that corporate transformation. And because obviously we're the first area to go through the smarter structures, the planning function in conjunction with that strategic implementation partner will be front and centre of the work there as well. And some of the work that I've seen emerging from this is how we're going to be doing things digitally, and things are really quite exciting. So I've got a lot of confidence, actually. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just before I call on Councillor Edwards, could you just clarify? I understood that the 250k is actually already in the budget, and it's just the way it's being spent that you're looking to be approved on the recommendation.
Yes, and as I've mentioned as well, the intention always was that, because you've got, as I mentioned, you've got the planning function, you've then got all the other areas that you touch, and again we've tried to put some fluidity into the regeneration budget so that we've got further T's in there as well. You're quite right. This is what was in the budget, an explanation of how it's going to be spent. And that is over and above what we hope will be the efficiency savings that will come through by the smarter structures as well. So,
okay, I was slightly surprised. That's all. That you were, if it's in the budget, why are you asking for approval? It's there. You don't need to ask for approval if it's already in the budget. But my burning question, I guess, is it enough? And it comes back to the point I was saying earlier on. Is this enough to help you to fix these problems? Okay, we'll wait for Councillor Edwards' question before you come back and answer that one then, Phil. Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Have we been dependent on costly agency staff, and have any of them been offered and taken up permanent jobs in the planning department? And if not, why not? And can I also ask, you mentioned that work's progressing on harmonising the 3 legacy schemes. So does that mean also that the local plan for BCP area is on track?
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Broadhead.
Well, with regards to the local plan, then as you've experienced, being part of the working group, it is on track. It's a big beast, and actually that will take a little bit of time. And there's an outlined timeline of what that will take. I think the crux of you asking that, I assume, was that a kind of a back of the mind question in that how is it compatible to have one team along the planning structure when we haven't yet done the local plan? And I'll defer to Nick to give you the kind of the view on the ground, but I think it's absolutely fine within the planning system to be dealing across a number of areas, because that you're guided by planning policy. But as we'd heard earlier on, the negatives of having it by far outweigh the positives. But yes, the work for the local plan is progressing as quick as we possibly can, and indeed will address a number of the issues as we've explored, not least around the kind of disparate nature we have of some of the applications that we've coming through, and where planning policy is, and trying to get some clarity on all of those. But I don't know whether you wish to, with your permission, Chair, Nick, you wish to add anything to that?
Well, there were the specifics on the staff questions. I don't know if Mr. Perrins, can you comment on that, please?
Yes, very happy to. Thank you for bringing me in, Chair. Just on the agency staff, the vast majority of staff in the planning department are permanent establishment planners, professional planners, but there are some agency staff. So I wouldn't say we're dependent on agency staff, but there are some agency staff in the service who obviously help to process applications and support our figures. Going forward, Smarter Structures project, this is the opportunity to consolidate the workforce, make sure we create the vacancies which we need to fill permanently and long term, and therefore we will be going out to recruit to those vacancies when we get the say-so through the corporate Smarter Structures project, and that will absolutely give the opportunity for agency staff to apply for those jobs, or we would test the market and see who else is out there. So yeah, it's a situation in time where we do need some agency staff just to make sure we're keeping things ticking over, otherwise we'd be in real trouble. But those staff will be offered the opportunity, should they wish, to apply for the jobs when they come up in the hopefully near future.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Edwards.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Although I'm not on the working group for the local plan, so I don't know how much on track it is. So that was why I asked.
I'm going to bring in Councillor Mike Cox in just a second. Could you just give us a feel for the numbers in terms of the percentage of your staff that are contractors, and can you give us any idea of how much work the department is outsourcing to other agencies at the moment, just roughly by percentage? Mr. Perrins?
Yeah, it's probably no more than 10% agency staff.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In terms of outsourcing, we haven't actually started the process of outsourcing the applications. Going to start in the next financial year, which is today actually. But it's going to vary. It's going to come down to how much money we want to spend from the 250,000. But it's going to be at least minimum 50 applications, but it could go up, could go down depending on the scale of those applications.
Okay.
But we can certainly provide an update on that once we really get going with that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on something that Councillor Slade raised in terms of the analysing some of the measurements that we have, because I do agree with her that it's very important to measure how these applications, once they've failed, how they get dealt with, because there is a real tendency that once you've gone past your target date, then to forget about them. You failed, the measurement's gone, and I do feel that we owe a duty to our residents that we should try and deal with those as quickly as possible and not just leave them on a heap to be done when you can. And so, in terms of the measurements that we see in that report, it would be very useful to have a much more detailed measurement so that we can monitor that going forward. So that was one point. The other point was I was intrigued that Councillor Broadhead couldn't answer the financial question, and so I'm just going to possibly comment and ask to see if it's possible that the reason that why we're asking for permission for part of the pot to come from another pot is that actually we are going to overspend the 250, and therefore part of it is being allocated from another pot so that we can top up the 250 effectively. Does that make sense?
Councillor Broadhead, does that make sense to you?
No.
Is that what I was saying earlier on? I mean, I suppose you could look at it like this. I mean, look, I'd be a bit unashamed about the fact that I am quite often bringing forward papers to Cabinet which don't necessarily need to come for Cabinet approval. But I think clearly this is an area that's important enough that regardless of whether you need Cabinet approval to do this or that, it's good to be able to talk about the problems that we've had, talk about the solutions we've got in the future, come to scrutiny so that we can tease it about and flesh out that vision. I suppose, we're back to this budget question, aren't we? And, you saw our budget. You saw that we didn't exactly hold back. We put significant resource into a number of areas. And clearly this is a really important area. If I felt, and we had this conversation with Leader, we've had this conversation with the planning team, if we felt that we needed to be chucking 3 times more money at this to fix a problem, we would have. If we felt it was 4 times the amount, that we would have. And equally, as I said earlier on, I think it's prudent to leave flexibility in other budgets to move things around and flex as you would need. I actually think the position that we are in now, if we were sat here still with 60% of only 60% of applications meeting the performance target, and we were 40% off, then it's quite clear that one answer is that you need a 40% increase in the budget to deal with it. We're now at the stage where we're at 90%, and we're about to deal with a lot of the problems through the structure, as well as this increase in funding, as well as looking at the local plan and the issues on the ground about a desperation of planning policy. And we've been very clear when we said to the team, kind of tell us how much you need to make this an absolutely brilliant system. And we've given them what they asked. So I'm answering your question directly from earlier on, Councillor Bartlett, about, is this enough? If it's not enough, then we'll put more in. But we almost gave a blank check to this, and I'm absolutely convinced now that we're running, now that we've fixed a lot of the historic problems, we're running at this 90% level. If we can get this structure in place right, if we can work with our strategic implementation partner and get the function operating at a proper capacity, and things like the major projects team, which we don't have at the moment, a lot of it's structural, and I think that unlocks a lot of the issues.
Okay, Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I'm not sure you answered my question particularly, although I welcome the fact that you're going to throw money at it, because it needs money throwing at it. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew how it was being paid for, and that you weren't slipping money from another pot. Which I don't mind where it comes from, providing everybody knows where it's coming from. And I just felt that maybe because you couldn't answer the question earlier, that maybe you were. Maybe it was coming from a different pot. That was my only point. But I don't think anybody's answered my question. My key question actually was about the measurements. Can we have a better measurement in terms of the report, so that we can monitor these applications, and so that we can see, how many people are getting left behind that don't meet the target to start off with.
Could I just come in on to help maybe with that? And I don't want to keep going back to the Bournemouth Council, but I'm going to have to again, because quarterly the planning board looked at the performance review of the planning system, including enforcement. It was a tool that was very useful. We could see how well we were doing. That stopped when our new council started, and I have asked twice for it to be reinstated, but I haven't seen any evidence it's going to, because that in itself does provide some performance monitoring of the system. I think, to be fair, I've said this before, I think we were slightly caught with our trousers down here, because I think the problem was getting out of hand and nobody really understood that it was. And now now we've got a really big problem to sort out. But that's just a personal view on it, and maybe you could look at that. But Phil, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I really agree with both of you. As I said earlier on, you need that not just the core data, but we've got streams of data that we should be looking and analysing, both about the important stuff, but also about the nuance of the detail, as Councillor Cox had said, about, if you look at how many are being extended, if you look at where the ones that haven't met in time go, it's a secret to not only operating a good system, but making sure that you keep track of it all. And that's why the very first planning improvement board, which we set up to resolve the issue, because we inherited a situation here which was not in a good place, that almost the very first thing that I said was, let's have the data in a really detailed, consolidated position, not so that I can look at it, but so that it can be shared more widely. If I may, Chairman, I would rather, and I'll defer to others' judgment on this, I'd rather we get to the position where we've got a one-stop shop of information about how our planning system is functioning in real time, with loads of granulations of how everything's working, which you can delve deep in, which councillors can access, then have quarterly meetings where we look at some of the facts. We could do both, I suppose, And that work is underway, and that was one of the first things we committed to. The big plan as well is also, I mean, obviously there's more work to do with the strategic partner from transformation, but that can and should be linking through, as I've said to the team, to things like our regeneration plan, so that I can go onto a dashboard, look at our regeneration project, see where it is in planning, see how it's doing with that, where is it matching the time, how does that relate to other things. It's all there, but we just need to have access to it. So I completely agree with both of you. We need to be doing more of that. It hasn't happened in the past, and that's a work stream that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, and the reason it's important, obviously, for our customers, there is a degree of public accountability for what we're doing in the planning system, and I don't think that's there at the moment, and that's why I suggest it should form part of the planning, planning reports, maybe on a quarterly basis. Councillor Mark Howell.
Thank you. I think this is really a question for Nick. It's in relation to performance of staff. It's the enormous challenge merging the three departments together, and I'm just wondering, because it seems to me that planning officers' role is they get a lot of autonomy. They're dealing with lots of different cases of different sizes, some of which go on for a long time. It must be very difficult to understand the level of a performance of a planning officer, especially when managers are also likely to be very busy. And I just wonder whether you have a handle on how perhaps you could explain how people are assessed in their performance, and do we have any confidence in what level generally the department is at in terms of working practices, excluding technology in that aspect, talking about the actual performance of individuals and their ability to, I suppose, both in terms of motivation and skills to actually perform to a set level.
Councillor Broadhead.
Apologies, I thought that was directed at Nick Perrins.
Yeah, it was.
Okay. Mr. Perrins?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, is the answer, in terms of we understand all our staff in terms of what they're doing and performance. It's quite often you have different skill sets for different projects. Different projects can be very complex. So it's about making sure the right people are doing the right projects. But fundamentally, yes, we have lots of data behind the scenes in terms of how staff are performing, how applications are moving through the system, and it's all part of, as we move forward into new teams, new structures, new systems, that will get better and better in terms of how we deal with things. But the staff, they're all excellent professionals. They're fully dedicated. It's been a very difficult year. They're all working to the absolute maximum, and we have to be mindful of that. With the current surges of demand, they're doing everything they can to perform as best they can, and we're being supportive of that, very supportive of that. But going forward, once we sort out our baseline, get more resources, get better systems, better process, absolutely, performance monitoring is a key part of any service, and we'll be, as with any service, we'll be having the best possible standards.
And can I just ask a second question now, which is in relation to salaries? Is the use of agency staff just an indication that we're experiencing short-term issues, or do we find it difficult to recruit people on the salaries that we pay in this area? Because I know in various other areas, particularly social care, we do find it very difficult to recruit people, and that is a significant part of that is salary.
Mr. Perrins?
Yeah, the BCP salaries, they're not, obviously everybody wants to be paid more, but they're not, they're not the lowest in terms of the industry. There are other councils who have lower, so they're not too bad. And historically, we've managed to fill vacancies okay, actually, but it's just been in the last 6 months, as we're moving with corporate transformation, smarter structures, there's a timing issue about when you can actually go out and recruit, because we don't know exactly what the structures are going to look like and how people may be affected. So there's a bit of that in the here and now. We need to rely on agency before we can actually get the green light to go and recruit. And when we do go and recruit, we'll need to make sure the salaries are competitive, get the best staff, and we'll have to talk to HR about whether you can use market supplements and other things which we're allowed to do. But generally, the salaries haven't necessarily been a barrier to filling vacancies as they have been in other departments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perrins. Okay, there are no more hands up. I'm going to bring this debate to a close now because we need to move on. But I would just like to say that, I don't think anybody underestimates the difficulty that the planning system has faced since LGR alone, and then to have the COVID situation thrown in amongst that. And then added to that, an increase in the amount of applications, and at the same time trying to modernise the service through additional and new IT systems, coupled with very difficult staff recruitment issues, and that's well understood. I am slightly more encouraged than I was at the beginning when Councillor Broadhead raised, the future and the demands being placed on the service. But I think he's fought his corner, and he's given me some reassurance that all will be well and that he has adequate resources to do it. So if we can help, we want to help. We don't want to be sitting here just criticising you. We want to see it be successful, and everybody does. But what I would like to do is to bring this issue back to the ONS board, say in 6 months' time, to see how you're getting on, see what progress is being made, to see if any additional help needs to be brought in. And so I'll take that as an action to put that on the forward plan for, say, 6 months' time, just to see how we're going. And I think it'd be interesting also if we could get some feedback from maybe some of our major developers to see what their assessment of how we're doing as well, because they've definitely got a voice in this, and I'm very keen that they are represented in this debate in the future. So having said that, I'll bring this to a close, and thank you so much, Mr. Perrins, for coming this afternoon and giving us your answers. So I'm going to move on now, I think, unless anybody else has got anything to say. No hands are up, so I'm going to move on. Agenda item 7, scrutiny of community safety related cabinet reports. And I'd like to call on Councillor Mo Hayes, portfolio holder for community safety, to present the paper to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. This might seem a little bit more boring after the very active discussion you had on the previous item. Before I actually introduce the paper, I need to actually point out a slight error actually between the main paper and the attached Appendix 1. In Appendix 1, paragraph 4.1, it actually states that approval is by portfolio holder. Actually, that is in fact not correct, because this will actually be taken to Cabinet for approval along with any comments or recommendation from your committee chair. So I just wanted to clarify that before I actually went into the main body of the report. So the paper before you sets out the new harmonised policy on BCP's approach to enforcement within regulatory services and licence is required as part of the LGR reorganisation process. So the role of regulatory services and licensing is one of protecting public health, ensuring the environment for our communities where we live, play and work enhances our health, creates a safe and healthy workplaces, reduces alcohol and tobacco related harm, improves food standards and food safety, and ensures that customers are sold safe and properly functioning products. Enforcement powers in these areas provide authorities with the ability to prohibit practices, products or equipment on an emergency basis where there is an immediate risk, to require improvements or changes to be made where appropriate, or to prosecute as a last resort. So none of these powers are actually used lightly. Most businesses do comply with the law, and local authority enforcement officers are encouraged to actually take an educational approach. only taking enforcement action where there is an immediate threat to address, or where a business simply refuses to comply in relation to a significant and serious issue. The enforcement policy is written in accordance with the Legislative and Regulatory Reform Act 2006, which sets out the principles of good regulation, and the Regulators Code, which requires the Council to publish its enforcement policy and explain how it will respond to non-compliance. Due to the strict governance framework in this area, there has been virtually no change from the Legacy Council's policies. The policy provides guidance to officers, businesses, and the general public on the range of options that are available to achieve compliance with all the community's regulatory activities. Section 2 in Appendix 1 provides details of who this policy actually applies to. It is designed to help officers, businesses, and the general public understand our objectives and methods for achieving compliance and the criteria we would consider when deciding the most appropriate response to a breach of legislation. As a council, we are committed to avoiding unnecessary burdens on businesses or individuals and to seek to encourage and promote compliance. The policy before you recognizes that enforcement action can have serious implications for all those involved. The new policy ensures that decisions about enforcement actions are fair, proportionate, and consistent, that officers apply current government guidance and relevant codes of practice, and that everyone understands the principles that are applied when enforcement is being considered. The policy provides detail on how we will find out about non-compliance, what we do when non-compliance is identified, why we consider taking enforcement action, the types of enforcement action we can take, how we decide what enforcement actions to take, representations and appeal should someone decide that the action the council has taken is not proportionate and that they disagree with it. And last but not least, cost recovery issues. So, Chairman, what I want to point out is that this paper does not cover is the resourcing and operational side of enforcement. What this item sets out is the methods and steps that are followed when carrying out enforcement activity. And I understand that as a committee, there has been widespread interest about enforcement in general. So I just wanted to be clear that this is just a paper that sets out the methods that will be followed, not the resourcing or the operational side. I also have with me today two officers, Andy Williams, Head of Community Safety, and Peter Hakin, who heads up the regulatory services. So if you have more technical points that are raised, they will be able to help. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Yeah, just before I invite Milieu, we are looking later on in the year at another paper that will look at the whole issue of enforcement right across the board. You know, how much does it cost us? You know, where is it? How is it organised? It'll be, and I think we'll be looking at a paper probably in May that will just define the extent of it and the areas where we do carry out enforcement, and then we'll decide how and if the committee want to take that forward at a later date. So yeah, Councillor Milieu, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think this paper looks fairly straightforward. It does adhere to the national regulations. What would be really helpful, I think, is when we have these sort of harmonisation papers come along, is to see like a bit of a comparison between the former policies and how it sort of relates to the new one. Because for me, it's all a bit. It's just nice to have that sort of simple transition to see what the changes actually are. My only question really was whether licensing committees had any involvement in this, whether it's just come from officers, just so I can understand a bit more about the process of how we got here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question, Councillor Earl. This is, as I say, this paper is actually how the method by which we would actually carry out enforcement. So in terms of licensing, obviously licensing, there are lots of other regulatory requirements that go with it. So I could probably ask Andy Williams to respond as to whether licensing has had any active involvement with this. Andy?
So yeah,
Come
thank
in,
you.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, May. This paper sets out the enforcement policy for licensing activities that are undertaken by officers and not that which is undertaken by the licensing committee. The licensing committee has its own issues around how it deals with licenses and potentially revokes licenses or reviews licensed premises. This is more to do with the decisions that are made by officers in relation to enforcement activities that they undertake.
Thank you very much. Councillor Earle, you intent?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vicky Slade, please.
Thank you. It was a similar point to Councillor Earle, because I don't think it was quite answered, in that it's very difficult when you're looking to scrutinise a policy which is talking about harmonising 3 previous policies. If you don't actually know what's different, you could very well say this looks lovely and find that there's a major change in one or more of those policies and we are not commenting on them, and we wouldn't know until someone fell foul of it. So I do think it's really important that we understand what's changed. And Councillor Haynes, I know this is about the governance of what we choose to do, but there are 2 major issues which just don't seem to be being addressed. One of them, which obviously I'm sure you're aware has come up recently, which is around the sex establishments that I think we all feel strongly we need to look at in terms of women's safety. But dog fouling, you know, it's really not good enough in this day and age that we've got all sorts of methods of enforcing, you know, everything under the sun and using drones on the beach, and yet communities are blighted by this, and there seems to be absolutely no capacity and no intent to resolve this for our communities. So my ask to you, and I know it's slightly off topic, is please can we have a significant piece of work on dog fouling, and I'd be very happy if we, you know, if we need to do that through scrutiny in coming up with a strategy, then I'd be very happy to get involved with it, because it's probably the biggest thing I deal with on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you for those comments and the questions, Councillor Slade. So I did actually mention in the presentation that there has been very, very little, if any, change in the harmonisation. So paragraph 6 in the actual main report does set that out, because this is regulatory and this is for licensing, the enforcement. We have to stick to the regulatory code in the method that we operate. So actually, although this is a harmonisation paper, as it states, both the policies in the 3 legacy councils were virtually identical. So literally, it is, rather than refer to 3 separate documents, just in case there was any variation of which it might be just a case of wording, but the actual how we can do it and what methods we follow were by and large the same, because it is actually governed quite strictly by the regulatory codes framework. So if that helps, because I, you know, obviously that was a question I myself had actually raised when I read it, to say, oh, so what's changed? And that is what the situation is. So in terms of your plea, I know it is off topic, dog fouling. I get that quite a lot as well in my ward. So just to be assured that things that are not covered by enforcement, not covered by any other bylaw, there is actually a piece of work that's about to commence where we will actually look at all these other aspects, of which dog fouling will be one of them. So, but thank you for raising that point.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes.
Yeah, thank you. Before I bring Councillor Kelsey, just to add to that, that was one of the areas that we'd be looking at in the paper that I was talking about just now, and along with a whole raft of other issues about enforcement, which ward councillors are dealing with every single day. and that was probably the biggest issue that when we were looking forward as a group to see how we could get ahead of the scrutiny and maybe get more of an overview about what's going on in terms of overview and scrutiny. Enforcement was the main theme that came out of most members as being of concern to them. But of course, it touches in so many different areas, and there are so many different parts of the council that are dealing with it. And it's done in a bit of a fragmented way, including the way that customers get involved or how they communicate with the council over those issues. So I know that ward councillors are frustrated a bit, and so are residents. And that's the whole purpose of looking at enforcement in the round over the next few months. So hopefully, Councillor Slade, we will be having a good chat about dog fouling as part of that debate. Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It was just a quick one, really, just to say to Councillor Haynes, I think it's a good report, what's been written. It's certainly a great step for us going forward to harmonise this. And I really appreciate the report. And I agree with what you just said, Chairman, about looking forward to other aspects later on in the year. If I may, Chairman, just a quick reassurance to Councillor Slade with regarding SEVs. We did have a working group on that within licensing the other day, and we did suggest that it comes to a member engagement group because it is a major piece of work, and I think it's something that needs a political steer as well as views from just the licensing board. So we have asked for that to come for a member engagement group meeting sometime later in April or early in May.
Thank you very much. Members, I see no other hands raised, and so I think we've probably got to the end of this debate on this paper. Thank you, Councillor Haynes, very much for presenting it to us. And I think we probably could do with a 5-minute comfort break. And so, Max, could you stop the live stream? Thank you, Max. Okay, members, we'll now come on to agenda item 8, which is the scrutiny of tourism, leisure and culture related cabinet reports. And there are 2 items here. Our museum, Poole Museum redevelopment, and the other management and development of leisure centres. And I'm pleased to welcome Councillor Mohan Iyengar, who's our portfolio holder for tourism, leisure and culture, to introduce the papers to us. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Steve. Okay, and hello to committee members and everyone tuning in. Undoubtedly, I get the most exciting projects, but having said that, I'm probably going to invite the most criticism and scrutiny from there. I'm delighted to say the least to bring this project, the first project, Poole Museum and Scaplan's Court, for the committee's attention this afternoon. This is a great story, and I hope committee members agree with this, obviously subject to challenges and subject to any recommendations you want to give me this afternoon, and they're very, very welcome indeed. This is a project quite a long time in the making, and credit to predecessors who've nurtured this one along. Credit very strongly to Officer Michael Spender, to Chris Saunders, and other officers have been very, very closely involved in this. And I think I'm talking to a group here, many of you have visited Poole Museum, Scaplan's Court, with kids, with relatives and others, and it's a particularly special place. But also, let's just get straight to my own scrutiny of it. It's a place that is considerably underused as well. Its light is not shining as brightly as it should be. So what this project is trying to do, if I can capture this in a few key points, is really open this up as a heritage asset. Believe it or not, even people like me who've been there many, many times, you look at it from a plan view overhead, and the amount of room I actually walk in it, even in all the floors, and actually going into Scaplan's Court and going a little bit in there, is probably about maximum 1/3 of the total space that's available. It's absolutely enormous in there. And to throw one stat at you early on, this project should repurpose about 500 square metres of space and actually open up in total about 1,500 square metres of space without actually doing any bolt-ons whatsoever, but by just actually, in a sense, opening up what's already there. It's an absolute treasure that we've got to make the most of. Second thing is to transform the visitor experience. We can take it up several notches, and I don't mean particularly highbrow, but take it up in terms of literally the number of things we can put on there and the richness of the experience that we can put in there, partly by opening up the space and partly by the range of interests, the stakeholders who are involved in this, and in a sense the quality and the frequency of the exhibitions that can come through as well. It's particularly exciting. The third thing, and this is in no order of importance, is the new opportunities for underrepresented or for less privileged groups. And I'd just like to say a little bit more about this because it is a particularly noticeable feature of this project. And the project really has done a lot of work on this to identify in particular 4 groups who've been underrepresented in terms of literary visit statistics to the museum. And again, in no order of importance, young people in educational settings, in particular, young people with learning difficulties or enrichment opportunities, people who have struggled to have their skills development supported, and particularly schools with a hyper premium type of children. That's the first group. The second group is families in particular with caring responsibilities, children with special educational needs, and hyperlocal families with low socioeconomic status. I know these are all terms, but I think I'm just trying to capture there in group 2, another group who've traditionally not been able to engage with the museum with Scaplan's. The third group is older people, socially isolated or lonely, and I know this has got broader applicability than just the museum, or outreach to those people in care home settings, or for those who literally want to be outside the home but want to have a nice, reflective, quiet place to go. And again, they're not being supported adequately so far. And the fourth, last but not least at all, is artists and creatives, including those in createch, digital industries, and those who face barriers, less so much because of lack of privilege or disability in some form, but literally they can't find their own space. There's no place for them to do their thing in the broadest sense. Okay, so 4 particular groups, and the project has tried to focus on them. We want to, with the project, make much more of a destination in that corner of Poole. And maybe I should have said at the beginning, of course, this project is about Poole and particularly the Old Town. No one's a bigger fan than me of wanting to see our other places of distinction of heritage right around BCP coming forward with similar projects like this one, in their own way and actually transforming and developing themselves with a nod to conservation. But this one is about Poole, and obviously what we want to do is use this to, in a sense, turbocharge that place as a cultural quarter, as a cultural destination, iconic for tourists, but most of all, indeed, for actually residents, for local residents to be proud of. We want it to enjoy considerable support monetarily, and in terms of literary influence, and in terms of literally the kind of excitement it can generate. And we want it to be part of a sort of a cultural quarter, which I've said, kind of a magnet for touring exhibitions that I've alluded to before, which really sort of puts Poole and in turn BCP most certainly even more strongly on the map in terms of exhibitions coming out of London and so on and so forth. Okay, I'm really pleased that this project's got considerable financial support so far. It's generated huge interest. Forgive me, Chairman, I've probably already talked too much on this. The options that are tabled on the paper for Cabinet, there's two options, and with a project like this, I'm really pleased the officers have actually segmented it this way, because there's almost endless options could be presented here. Option one is the big project. It's museum and Scaplands both together. There are actually two projects, but doing it as one project. Total cost 4.2 million, and you can see the headline stats there, which is a bold bid to the National Lottery Heritage Fund of 2.2 million, £500,000 from Historic England, Historic England, 1 million from potential borrowing, 300,000 from donations, of which we're part way through that yet, and 0.2 million from SIL that has already been pre-allocated by the original Borough of Poole, and that sums 4.2 million. That is the bold ambition. And by the way, I should say what we've had, although it is earmarked, is the 1 million recently from Salix, which is part of the Department of Education to support decarbonisation projects as well. Okay, if we don't get the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and we really hope we do, if we don't get it, then we have to scale the project back and we'll just do the Scaplands bit with the £500,000 from Historic England, the 0.2 from the SIL, 0.3 borrowed, and it'll become a £1 million project. And we will, of course, make the best of that. Of course we will, but obviously we'll have missed the bigger ambition. So there's the options in front of us. I don't want to, I could say more, Chairman, but I don't want to take much more time on this, but I really, really welcome committee members' challenge and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Mohan, I think it's a great paper. Yourself and Michael, yeah, very, very well done. It's a really good piece of work, and I hope you get the lottery funding to go ahead with your plans. If I may, I was reading through your ENA, which is excruciatingly long and excruciatingly detailed. So I do have to say well done on that one. It's a very good piece of work. Can I ask, how are you going to achieve some of these commitments that you've made for that to ensure participation from the underrepresented groups, etc.? How do you propose to do that, and how will the museum itself represent the cultural diversity of Poole and the slightly wider area there? How do you anticipating that happening, please? You're muted, Mohan, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, with your permission, we can double do this. I can, Michael, I'm happy to kick off, and then if you've got something to add to it. We're so pleased. This is part of what's called the Cultural Compact, and some of you I think may know this is something we approved when was that, I think in February's Cabinet. We got this through as part of the Cultural Compact, but not essentially part of this project, is to actually get a board in place, which sounds all very stuffy, but actually get a wider forum in place as part of the compact. So this is kind of how I'm answering your question, David, which is that what we want within that broader forum is exactly the kind of thing that you're just talking about there, which is how can we have a much more fluid and a much more diverse and kind of, you know, it's almost more so it's much more informal, and it's much more dynamic in the way we can bring people in and help them understand not just what's happening in the museum and in Scaplands Court, but also what's just generally how we're going to uplift the entire cultural scene. Of course, it starts in Poole, but actually across the whole conurbation as well. And so, again, I won't do justice to it here, but literally we've got these mechanisms in place, and with the Arts Council's expectation and support around it, that we will do exactly that and get such a forum going as well. Michael, if you can add anything.
Thank you. we have just finished actually a series of public engagement sessions which have been extremely successful, and we've also just been through our midpoint review with the National Lottery Heritage Fund for the first stage of the project, and they congratulated us on the inclusivity and equalities within our project, which we were pleased about, and the fact that we have an inclusive reference group that we're working with, and that we are co-creating our galleries and our interpretation with community groups and with the universities and many other bodies within BCP, so within Poole in particular. So it's a very actively co-created project, and what is absolutely essential is that our underserved and underrepresented communities feel that their stories and their histories are represented in the museum displays.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Kelsey.
More than happy, thank you, Chairman. I really appreciate it, and I particularly appreciate in the ENA the mention of the veterans and the armed forces having involvement as well. That, to me, that's music to my ears. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Slade.
Thank you very much. Michael will know that I love Poole Museum, and Scapland's Court is a total favourite of mine. So I'm really pleased to see this coming forward. I've got a couple of specific issues I just want to ask about. I was really interested in the Kids in Museums audit, because my children are always involved in the Kids in Museums emails we get through, and there's quite a lot there about to improve it for children, and I wondered whether that was collectively across the two sites or whether it divided, because Scapland's Court is just so wonderfully engaging for children, but I have to say from my own experience, Poole Museum can sometimes leave them a little bit cold. It's much more adult focused in the way that it presents, and I'd be interested to, apart from one floor, which is really great, right up high. So I just wonder whether that was done separately. And I had a few questions about, I thought that we had a project to move the Family History Centre out because we were going to do something with a glass floor in that building. I didn't see anything in this. Is that a separate project? And talking about the Family History Centre, because that's obviously part of the museum, is there nothing more we can do around, because there's so much interest right now in Ancestry.com, and obviously we were on the TV, weren't we, a couple of years ago with a case, and I just think it would be really good if we could really make it a destination for people to learn about family history, not just people who've got a local family history. The next question is around the cafe. Have I read this right, that are you looking to move the cafe out from the museum and into Scapland's Court? And okay, I have read that right, which I think is potentially good, but I'm slightly concerned about the impact on the physical build, because that's such a precious building. And is that going to be okay with such a big throughput of people? And the final question I have is about the referencing to community hub. It means so many different things to so many different people, and I couldn't tell from the report what it means in this context. Thank you.
Thank you.
But lovely, love it.
Thank you, Councillor Iyengar.
Could I ask Chairman if I could ask Michael to lead off on these, because some of them are actually the detail of the projects itself. Is that okay? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Spender.
Thank you, Chair. Taking your questions in order, Councillor Slade. Thank you for the points about Poole Museum in terms of kids and museums, and I think you made a very fair point. Traditionally, Scapland's Court has been a immersive schools experience for many years. What we haven't taken full advantage of is the opportunities that Poole Museum itself provides for immersive schools activity. And with the opening up of the museum, which Councillor Iyengar described earlier, that will give us the opportunity. There'll be that wow factor, there'll be digital interactives, there'll be a lot going on in the museum, there'll be opportunities for play, which kids in museums are really keen on, and we've done some really good piloting of play activities during the period of the pandemic, in fact. So I think you're absolutely right, and that is exactly what we'll be doing. In terms of the History Centre, yes, you're absolutely correct that we are moving that out of the Wall Hall, what's also known as the Town Cellars, which is one of our 2 Grade 1 listed buildings, and a really important one as well, the only surviving medieval commercial building of its type in the country. That will give us the opportunity to fully interpret and show off that fantastic space. And we are replacing the inaccessible sunken floor with a new ground floor in the Wall Hall, which will enable the installation of a glass floor to be able to show some maritime archaeology, exactly as you've described. And we will be moving the History Centre into the main part of Poole Museum on 2 floors, one on floor 1, which will connect with the maritime heritage, and one on floor 2, which will connect with Poole's community heritage and family history, as you describe. So what we're doing is bringing that incredible research facility that is almost unique, actually. There aren't many museums that have this. Right into the heart of the museum, and so the visitor offer, the offer for our communities will be that they can come and see their heritage in the 2nd floor gallery, and also research their family history and local history in an adjacent space, which they aren't able to do at present. The third thing you ask about is about the cafe going into Scaplan's Court. Yes, that's exactly what we plan to do. We don't have sufficient covers to meet demand on the 3rd floor, and we want to turn that over to community use and to connect with the pottery displays on the 3rd floor and provide more covers in Scaplan's Court. We are fully confident that we won't be harming this precious building by doing that. In fact, what it does offer us the opportunity to do is to staff the building to enable public access by having catering and other staff associated with the cafe on site, which we can't at present do within our budgets. So it'll also be much more visible and much more of a community space than it can be at present. And the 4th point, in terms of it being a community hub, when we set off on this project, we were very conscious of the value that we can provide with our incredible historic spaces to provide places for communities to meet, for artists and creatives to gather and to be inspired by Poole's heritage, and that's exactly what we want to do. We had originally thought that the Wall Hall, the Town Cellars, would be a suitable space for that, but we've had a bit of a rethink, and we've actually created a much larger space than we have at present in the upper hall at Scaplan's Court by removing a partition wall, and with new fire exits and a lift that will be much more accessible than this is at present.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I feel very much more reassured now I've heard more about it. It's just you can never get the whole of it in a report, so I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jackie Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's always good to hear some money being invested in our museums. I love museums too. So does this mean Poole Museum will be still free admittance? And I know Christchurch's Red House Museum is free. However, Bournemouth's Russell Coates Museum charges an entrance fee. Now, as part of harmonisation, are you all going to charge an admittance fee, or are you going to drop Russell Coates's fee? Thank you.
Councillor Iyengar.
Yeah, I think the short answer, Jackie, is this is one that we need to move on to. For excuse me, Poole Museum, there's no intention to be charging, okay, for this, and we pride ourselves on being actually Dorset's most popular free attraction, in fact. But on the other hand, I think you raise a good point that we're going to have to get our heads around, and not in the too far away future as well on this one. We're not going to drop equally Russell Coates to a zero charge either. So I just need to give you a holding response on that one at the moment. Yes, we do have differences. You may call them anomalies we've got between the different places, and not part of this project, but as a separate piece of work, we can come back on this one. Okay, I don't necessarily think harmonisation. We need harmonisation for harmonisation's sake across BCP. That's a personal view, and I'm obviously open to other views on that one, because the museums really are different, not just different in their look, but different in terms of their model and what they offer and what they stand for and so on. They really are different products. But on the other hand, I think your question's absolutely noted, and it's something we've got to look at.
Councillor Ianga, would you mind if I was to put an action in our action sheet asking you to come back to us on this issue at some point? It doesn't have to be, within a month or two. Just like to record that, that this issue is being addressed somewhere.
Okay. Could I? Yes, Chairman. Of course. Yes. Could I maybe after the meeting? Can we finesse how that question is put? Because if I can explain, if it's phrased in just when are we going to harmonise museum charges, if I may, that would not be the right question, because they really are different. If it's something around what is our policy, if anything, around all of the museums and galleries, do we have an overarching, for instance, overarching strategy? Do you have an overarching something around all of our venues? Then yes, fine, absolutely. Okay. But they really are different.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mark Howell.
Thank you. Yeah, this is fantastic news for Poole, and fingers crossed and hope that we win the money to be able to do it in full. And the one point on it that I'd just like to stress is that the creating a civic space within now Scaplan's Court is a really important part of making Poole Town Centre work in the future, I think, because currently there is no civic space. There's no place for people to meet from different backgrounds who are interested in trying to make the town centre work. Residents and businesses, in most towns would have a space like that, and Poole does not have that space, and this is an opportunity to create that. And therefore it's very important that the pricing structure is such that it does not price out local groups from using it. And obviously groups of this nature, a lot of them will want to meet in the evening, and in the past the cost of putting on staff to keep the facility open have made costs quite high, I think. So I just think that shouldn't be lost in this. I'm sure it's not, but it is really important that we come out of this with that kind of space, because it can bring people together in a way that is not happening at the moment. The second point was really a bit off this paper, but it relates to one of the first points that Councillor Ianga mentioned in terms of the 4 groups that he identified, and the final group about people looking for workspace, artists, etc. Obviously this project doesn't really address that, but it's something that is important within the wider town centre area, and Poole Old Town is particularly suited to developing that kind of cultural feel with small businesses, maybe Brighton Lane style, a little mini style, artists, etc. But one of and I appreciate that we'd be looking to the Cultural Compact to guide us and in many of these ways going forward. But I think it's really important the council also takes a role in this because what has happened in terms of people and the arts in this conurbation is that there's been a concentration towards Southbourne area and Bournemouth, and Poole has kind of been hollowed out. Then obviously the pottery is closed, and it needs an injection of cultural people in it to make it work. And you know, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, that actually if you haven't got the people, then they're not going to make it work. So we need to really work on trying to build something in this side of the conurbation and not let it all happen on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anger.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. On both of those things. First of all, in terms of the civic space, critical to have it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, total agreement. I probably don't need to say much more. The one about pricing out local groups. No, I'm fanatical that it should not be an issue at all. Any charge or anything. You know, we'll make it as free to the extent that we can for as long as we can. These things, or else we'll just ruin our principles of inclusivity if we do anything like that. The second one is about looking for workspace. Yeah, you're right. It is in a sense outside the remit of the project, but equally I don't want to be all sort of stiff and formal about this. You're right to mention the compact, because and the next thing coming up is of course the cultural compact's infusion into the local plan, really. So on that big broad heading there of those 3 headings in the compact, which is talent, infrastructure and place, is particularly the place bit, which is that how do we have the more subtle conversation about not just the big buildings and the houses and everything, but how do we sort of nurture along, if that's the right word, you know, cultural quarters, which then includes where do people dwell and where people can sort of have the most modern, most progressive kind of workspaces as well locally. And I think this project is serving to sort of create that magnet in the middle, in that part of Poole, in the old town there. And then what the rest of the kind of local plan has got to do is be built around that and say, literally, how can we foster that kind of, how shall I put it, that kind of sort of buzz, that kind of sort of thronging of people around there, where they don't just come to be entertained, but they can come to work, they can come to eat, they can do various other things there as well. Okay, so local plan has got a big role in this, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor O'Neill, you had your hand up, but it's disappeared.
All right. Yeah, it's related to some of the, or it was related to some of the previous comments. First of all, I'm delighted that Scaplan's and the museum is going to be developed. It is underutilised, and we've got one hell of a story to tell. I'm a little bit intrigued because we're relying on lottery funding and borrowings, and that's all well and good as we set it up, and we want it to be an outstanding success. But with success comes a higher footfall and an increase in operating costs like heating, lighting, staffing, security, ongoing maintenance, and we should assume further development because it needs to be living dynamic. Without charging in due course, will we have the revenue opportunity to offset what could be considerable costs with the growth that we'd like to see in the usage?
That's right, Iyengar.
Yeah, actually, could I? I've got to ask Officer Michael on this one. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. One of the main aims of increasing the available public space in Poole Museum and Scaplan's Court is the opportunity it gives us to change what at the moment is an hour's visit to a half-day visit. So increase of the dwell time is one way in which we intend to increase revenue spend by visitors. From donations, catering and retail, for example, as well as the other activities we can do in enlarged spaces, there is a real opportunity there to generate significant extra income, and our business plan projects that very clearly, and that does enable us to increase the revenue income, which will in turn support the maintenance plan. So to answer your question specifically, on those costs, we're not actually we're increasing the public spaces, but we're not increasing the overall footprint of the two buildings, of course, because they're listed buildings. So the actual day-to-day maintenance and running costs, operating costs, isn't actually much greater than it is at present, and that revenue generated from the increased activity, the increased visitor numbers as well, will more than offset the costs.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spender. Well, there are no more hands up now, and this is an exciting project, and it'd be brilliant news for Paul. And I really wish you well with your bid for money from the Heritage Fund, and really good luck for it. And I look forward to being there when it all happens. Yeah, good luck with it. So I think we now move on to the management and development of leisure centres, Councillor Iyengar, which is also yours. You lucky chap.
Yeah, thank you again, Chair. This paper has 3 parts to it, so I'll introduce it, and I'm aware that a part of this subject is commercially sensitive, but I'll do the intro to start with. There are 3 parts, committee members, to this, in no particular order again. The first part is to do with SLM, Service Leisure Management, aka Everyone Active, who run the 3 centres in Poole, which is the Dolphin Centre, Rossmore, and the Ashdown Centre. And it is a short-term extension, a short-term sort of renewal of the contract with them to tide us over for a while. That's part 1. The second part is 2 specific works in Rossmore and 2 Rivers Meet. Rossmore, of course, in Poole, 2 Rivers Meet in Christchurch, which is one for the synthetic turf pitch, and the other one is a sort of a repurposed carpeting, a more basic job, but which definitely needs doing in the 2 Rivers Meet. So 2 specific projects. And then the third one, which is coming forward to Cabinet, which is just to note, is the updated and baselined business plan for BH Live for the next fiscal year that we're just starting. And of course, BH Live being the operator who run the BIC, the Pavilion, and for our purposes here, they own and manage 6 centres, but 3 particularly, which are council land and council buildings, which is Littledown Centre, Pelhams, and Stokewood. So if I turn to shall I carry on, Chair, with the first of those items?
Yes, please do, yeah.
OK, on the first of those items, what you have in front of you, committee members, is the proposal to extend SLM. And this is for a period, and their year starts actually in May, their financial year. So to extend them for the 10 months starting from May through to the end of March 2022, and then for the following year through to March 2023 as well. And at each point during that, spaced apart by about 6 months, there'll be a review of how things are. Now, there are a number of figures associated with this, which I won't get into before you give me permission, Chairman. But the thinking behind this extension, if I can explain this, is that SLM have the contract with us. They've had a contract for 15 years since 2006 with us, which means therefore it's expiring in May this year. So we had to do something, and if we'd been in more, if we'd been more in peacetime, this would have been something which, in sort of maybe perhaps in previous administration, perhaps 1 or 2 years ago, and even had we not gone through BCP, etc., this would have been looked at, and maybe a transformational approach would have been put in place. But for whatever reason, anyway, we are here where we are now, and we need to secure the future of the Poole leisure centres. So a few options were put on the table, and all options were looked at, and credit to the officers on this one, which is the full range of things, which is, do we bring the Poole centres back in-house? Do we change rider? Do we go to a different provider if that was feasible and if that was desirable? Or third thing is, broadly, do we just keep going with the same provider and do a short-term expedient pending a longer-term look at the whole thing? And obviously the third thing is what we've gone for. What we think is an option that has had external input into it. Max Associates is our hired consultant on this. They've gone around for best practice, and the deal that's been done here has been negotiated and it has been recommended from an external source, and it's been championed to me by the officers as something which, in the circumstances of COVID and given the losses that SLM has made in the current year to date, is reasonable, all things put together. So that's the SLM part of it, and I welcome any questions on that. I'm mindful, Chair, that I've not mentioned any figures in my discourse just now, and hopefully that's correct. I'll take your steer whether we need to go behind on any of this. Well, is it okay I've done the SLM bit first, Chair, and then we'll do the next and the next? Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm obviously going to open this up to members, and I will give that warning that if anybody wants to talk about any element of the confidential information that you've been provided, then we will have to go below the line to discuss it. Now, if we're dealing with each bit individually, we may have to come in and out. If you sort of
whichever you wish, Chair.
Which could make it very complex. So I actually think it would be better if we go through each of the items and then open it up to members at that point. Otherwise, we could get ourselves into quite a tiz about coming in and out of this meeting.
Okay.
So
thank you.
If you carry on, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So that's the first part. That's the SLM in pool. The second bit, let me hop over then to the BH Live, which is in a similar vein, being somewhat sensitive. BH Live is, as you know, is a partner, a service partner who we have a formal agreement with, a contractual agreement with. BHL own the three centres, Little Downs, Pelham and Stokewood, where we are the landlord and we're the buildings owner. There's three other centres in pool for which literally BHL are the operator of them, but of course we're interested in those insofar as it affects BH Live's revenue and their costs, and also BH Live have interests in Croydon and in Portsmouth as well, which go back several years. BHL of course have been affected by over the past year, and this was the subject, I think, as councillors in this group will know well, the subject of a working group and a detailed scrutiny, which happened back over June to August, just into September last year, to look at what package of support would be given to BH Live, which in a sense would safeguard the service, but which was appropriate given the very, very worthy calls on other councils' finances at that time as well. So what the paper outlines now is BH Live's business plan for the year ahead, the year that we're just starting, and it also details in that plan what is the package that BCP Council has agreed with BH Live for the year going forward. And that is coming to Cabinet just to note, but obviously any questions, any challenge from the committee are most welcome below the line on that one. And the third item, which I can talk about more freely, is the things that council is doing in Rossmore and Two Rivers Meet. And even though these are probably less glamorous, I'm really particularly pleased with these things, and not just because I used to play a lot of football myself and rugby as well. Is that at Rossmore, how much does a football pitch cost? Believe it or not, about £1 million. Goodness me, it's absolutely top notch, this, and I hope the location of this, and how well used it will be, what a great location it is for something like this, will not be lost on anybody in this room, so to speak. The cost of it, yes, it's a lot. It's $1 million for the Rossmore piece. Sorry, 1 million just for that, which is 0.7 borrowed, and the rest of it from the Football Foundation. Great credit to them, of course. And 0.1 million, £100,000 for the recarpeting of the playing pitch there at the Two Rivers Meet. I know some people will, I'm anticipating a question, a lot of money spent in Poole, not so much spent in Christchurch. Literally, that's what it costs to replace both of them like for like in a way. I will be minded to spend, to even out the spend proportionately right across the conurbation, if that's a question that's going to come, most certainly. But we do need to do the Rossmore one right now. It's right at the end of its life, and if we're not to see it deteriorate and to lose the revenue from the hirings from that site, we've got to replace it now. A very similar case also applies to the Two Rivers Meet installation as well. And believe me, Two Rivers Meet, we're absolutely proud as punch with Two Rivers Meet. As you probably know, they just won the Prestige Award just last month for the best leisure centre in the Southwest as well. And that was on the basis of their online offerings, particularly during COVID, and also the very proactive and the very caring way they communicated with all their residents. So we absolutely want to uphold and support Two Rivers Meet very strongly. I think that's, I'll stop there and I'll very happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, yeah, thank you very much for that comprehensive overview of the paper. Councillor Lewis Allison, and just to remind you that any discussion about confidential areas would have to go below the line. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to ask about the review of leisure centres. So we first passed a paper, I think it was either December 19 or January 2020, to start the work on that leisure centre review. I can appreciate that things are obviously very different now to how they were then, and COVID's obviously delayed that process. But I was just trying to get a clearer picture of when exactly we can expect that review to take place, and then therefore when we can start to implement the results of that review.
Okay.
Councillor Iyengar, yeah.
Actually, okay. Now, if I say imminent, that's in the context of things like summer readiness kicking off and just so on. So sorry to answer it with that first, but it literally is that, because at the moment, I think until we, all of us, all councillors and our residents, until we acclimatise with sort of what's coming our way on our seafront and inland from our seafront, I think that's going to be quite rightly our, for many of us, our first preoccupation at the moment. But back to your question, Lewis, it just, I mean, imminently, because I would have preferred not to have done these short-term expedients, I've got to say, because I'd rather do it in one, in one step, literally go straight to what is the transformative thing that we want to get to. So if I say within months, I hope, I'm sorry to be kind of vague about that, but literally not in the long grass, within months. Yeah. So we're now in April, just started. I mean, for instance, if I say, for instance, like June, July, no later than that, we want to be starting this work. Okay. All right, and then we can talk about how to involve it, because I absolutely do want sort of a very collaborative input into this. I do understand a lot of people will be interested in this, and they'll really want to see it not only just protected, but also developed. And also, I don't want to prejudge the outcome, but maybe spiced up a bit and made a bit more kind of, varied and interesting and so on and so forth. I think there's room for that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Councillor Allison, content? Okay, lovely. Councillor Vicky Slade?
Thank you. I just want to come back on that really, because the only question I had was from the restricted part of the paper. So, and I'm quite happy to take it offline to make life easier. My question is around that process. I'm really pleased it's going to get going within the next few months, but what is the engagement going to be with members and with sports groups, etc., and general members of the public about what we would like that to look like? Because it feels like we've got a playing pitch strategy, and a few years ago we had another strategy, and we've got all these strategies, but nothing ever seems to come out of the strategies. And I think what we actually want to see is delivery of something new. So how are we going to make sure that what we get is what the people who are going to be ultimately using them want, rather than just another fabulous bound strategy?
Okay. All right. Answer that. First of all, I completely agree with, I think, where you're coming from with the question, because I've been around 6 years here, and just I've seen enough where there's a paper and then things happen, and then was that linked to the paper that was approved back then, sort of thing. Well, actually, funny enough, in the sports thing, I have tried to make a few connections. It is actually linked back to a certain sort of what have you, but almost if you didn't look carefully, you wouldn't know really. And then you do wonder that various other things are going on without any connection to the strategy that was previously done. I'm determined to be kind of different with this. which is that we'll put in place something which is almost like it's suitably ambitious, but it's not in the clouds. The second thing, and then something with real specifics in it as well. So it's something which is kind of this year, next year, year after kind of thing, not for 20 years hence. In terms of the engagement, you spoke about that. Now, deliberately, what I don't want to be, please, Vicky, is almost like lay out exactly how it's going to be here, because I'd be partly winging it, if I may, because this I think I need to think about with a few others as well as to how we're going to do this engagement, and actually I'd welcome views on it as well, because we've got an enormous number of people involved in this whole realm, and of course here. And I'm going to infer from what you said, you're not just talking about the indoor sports like the gyms and football pitches and everything, or indoor sports, whatever. We're talking about the outdoors. We're talking about parks, gym equipment, walking tracks, cycling tracks, even bike paths, everything, even scooters on the prom. But it's talking about the broader getting the area's fitness back, and exercise and physical health and well-being. There's a link to the health side as well. And as soon as I say that, we're into an enormous number of people. And I think now the challenge is literally almost, frankly, how do we cut it down in a way? Because there'll be so many people who are desperately keen to say something in this area and want to offer great ideas into what this council should be doing in the future. And I want to be as inclusive as I can in this, but I will absolutely welcome advice on how we do that and how we actually keep it moving forward as well, because we've got to get something done in this as well. But I'm determined to be inclusive, and what I said to Councillor Harrison's previous one, I kind of really want us to be a bit different about this as well, to start bringing in some of the voices and the influences and the kind of the things that we've not traditionally had when we've done things like kind of big contracts and usual suspects in this space. I think there's a real chance now. I think we're trying to catch the mood nationally, even internationally, to sort of like think a bit different now about what does kind of physical exercise and well-being mean in BCP. Okay.
Yeah, can I just briefly come back, Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah.
Just really I think that's a really good, really important point, is that sport and recreation is changing rapidly. Some of the activities our children do are very different from the activities that we did or our parents did. And some of the activities older people want to do now are not the music and movement that perhaps the previous older generations wanted to do. And I think we have the opportunity. We've got such an incredible, diverse community. We could really, set the world alight with doing some great stuff. And if we can find a way to let some of the more independent niche groups use our spaces in an innovative way, to explore new ideas with short-term contracts before they have to make very expensive commitments that that their business models and the public mood might not actually involve. I'd love to see us do something a bit more innovative, and I'm really pleased you're including the outdoor sports, because we've got two fabulous harbours. We're both involved with sailing, and that is a sport that we don't talk enough about how wonderful our water sports are, and that should be part of our strategy going forward. So happy to work with you however I can, Moham.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, go on then.
Oh yeah, it's total agreement. Sorry, maybe I'll summarize. Total agree. Yeah. This is part of just one sentence, Chair. This is actually put like this. This is nothing short of part of our sort of wanting people to come and live here of all ages, come live here, raise their families here, and do all sorts of outward bound, inward bound, well-being, health, physics. It's part of daily living here in this corner of Britain. This part of Britain, and just that's what we should be going for.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that Councillor Slade is considering what us older people would like to do with our leisure activities in the future.
We'll keep the ballroom dancing club, mind you.
Thinking about us. Councillor Mike Cox, thank you. You're on mute, Mike.
That's probably better. Stupid. I'm being an accountant, I can't help deal with numbers, so I may stray into financial figures. So do you want to?
Okay, well, can I just go to Councillor Kelsey first then, to see, unless yours is also to do with the numbers. Councillor Kelsey?
No, Chairman, I was just going to say that I didn't really feel the need to go below the line, but if Councillor Cox does, then obviously we will. But if I can just come to mine beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just really to say to Mohan that he mentioned earlier about being accused of spending money in Poole rather than in Christchurch or in Bournemouth or whatever. I don't think that's a problem. I think the money has to be spent where it's needed to be spent. It's not a case of prioritising one section over another or one gym space over another. It's spending the money where the equipment needs refurbishing. It doesn't matter whether that's here or in Timbuktu. As long as the equipment we have is up to date, usable, that is the main thrust of what we need to be doing. On our leisure centres, particularly on our gyms, are we going to, I'm glad to see what you're doing in Poole, because I think with having COVID and with having all the gyms and everything closed for the last sort of like 14 months, I think Councillor Slade is absolutely correct when she said we've changed the way we exercise now. You know, we all do totally different things. So I'll be interested to see how, when they do reopen in a couple of weeks' time, how they start to fill their spaces again, and whether that will actually have a knock-on effect on what we provide at such places as the Little Down, Stokewood, David Lloyd, David English, places like that. Because, I mean, I can go along to the gyms in the town centre here in Bournemouth and pay £15 a month. Obviously, you don't get quite the same facilities as you would at the Little Down, etc. But I think we might just have to relook at what we do provide from facilities for the public to make sure we're giving them exactly what you want. More outdoor gym spaces are obviously a plus nowadays. I mean, you have them over in Poole and we have them along the seafront, even though they were out of commission during COVID, which I did find a little bit strange, but that's beside the point. So I think we do need to relook at the whole strategy, and I look forward to that being done in the near future. That was all I needed to say, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, members, we need to go below the line, so I'd like to make the following motion. That under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act of 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. Can I confirm, members, that there is no dissent from this motion? I see no dissent from this motion. Max? Thank you. Welcome back to members of the public that may be watching. We've had a good debate about this particular topic. There are no recommendations coming from the Overview and Scrutiny Board, although a few actions have been taken. So I think that will now bring us to the end of that debate, and I'd like to move on to the last item on the agenda, which is the future meeting dates for 2021-22. And if members could note them, please, for the future. And with that, that brings us to the end of this session of the ONS board. And someone is saying local plan to me, but it's not on my list here.
Yeah.
I thought that was for this evening.
No.
It's not on my agenda list.
Item 9.
Yeah, item 9 is update from the local working plan.
Yeah.
My item 9 says future meeting dates, but okay, I'll give it. Okay, right. Let's have a go. Local plan update. Yes, the working group met again, and if you remember the last meeting, we looked at the urban plan to see where we might be able to meet the housing targets, which I think was 42,000 over quite a period. I can't remember exactly what the dates were, but there was overall there was a shortage in the available sites. And so at our last meeting, what we did was we looked at and that shortage incidentally was based on the current planning policies regarding the heights of buildings. So the last meeting, we actually looked at whether the heights of buildings could be extended in certain areas in order to overcome the shortfall that we had in our housing supply, which are required in order to meet the government targets that are placed upon us. That shortage, if you remember, was about 9,500, something like that. So the last meeting, we did look at the various areas that are already described as tall building sites. We also looked at I think it's the 19 district areas where would it be possible to extend the heights of the buildings slightly. And so we looked at a range of issues, and the ideas were offered to us by the team working on the local plan. They were bounced off the members for their reactions. And we had a very interesting debate, but at the end of the day, it does appear that by increasing just moderately in some district areas, being obviously mindful of heritage issues and all those planning issues that you're faced with, looking at district areas, and also maybe a slight increase in some of the areas where there are already tall buildings, for example, in the Lansdowne, what would that actually do in terms of reducing that shortfall? And in fact, it came down to still having a shortfall of around 4,600 homes if we were to meet the government targets. So the next stage to this is to look at where else we might be able to accommodate those homes. Now, I don't want to frighten anybody to death here, but obviously one of the things that the council has to do in order to justify its decisions to meeting or not being able to meet those targets is to address all areas. And one of the areas that obviously comes up for debate is the green belt. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we are deciding to build in the green belt. It's just that the council has to, under its obligations to central government, in terms of meeting its targets, has to look at the possibilities. And if it's discounted, it's discounted. But it still has to go through the process of looking at it. And so at the next meeting, that's what the working group will be looking at and listening to ideas from those working on the local plan as to how that shortfall can be accommodated. At the end of the day, it may be that it's not possible. And so those figures will be challenged, those targets will be challenged, but they still have to be looked at some point. And so that really is the update from the working group. And I see that I've got a question come out, Councillor Slade.
Sorry, I apologise for speaking on every item. I'll try not to do that this evening.
Okay.
I'm really nervous about what you're saying about increasing heights in 19 districts, because that basically is potentially meaning going, above perhaps 4 stories in places that have never had that before. can you shed any light on what that really means and how ward councillors will be engaged with? Also, one thing I really can't get from anybody is what is the current timeline? When are we going to go out to some sort of consultation? Because we're supposed to be done by the end of next year. Dorset have obviously done their consultation, so we're at least 3 months behind them. And I can't really seem to get any idea of when this is going to happen, because I'm conscious we shouldn't fall into the summer bit. So yeah, what do you mean by modest change in height? And finally, the sill charging structure, which obviously is a major part of the local plan process. Is there any talk about those changes? Because they could be radically, and there's huge consultation with the industry on where you can charge sill, and I know that becomes very contentious with developers. I wondered at what point that comes in. Thank you.
We've not discussed sill charging structures at all at the moment. It's a question of how the housing targets can be accommodated. So that's the only issue we've looked at so far. In terms of heights and modest, yeah, what is modest? Well, a tall building is actually, I believe, categorised as one that's 6 stories or higher. But in terms of all districts, there's not a blanket statement we're going to build across all district areas. It's the question, is it possible to go up 1 story maybe? And where and which districts could it accommodate? As I said just now, heritage and planning constraints will prevent constructions, but you've got to look at where you might be able to do it, and that's exactly what the team are working on. Where might it be possible? Where might it be acceptable? But I can't give you any definitive statements. Well, we're looking at this particular district and we think we can go up 3 or 4 stories in that area. It's not as specific as that, I'm afraid. In terms of member engagement, how is it going to happen? Well, what will happen, of course, is that the local plan will be produced and it will be presented in the usual way to council for approval, first, through the normal democratic process. The engagement of ONS is purely to help officers by them allowing them to bounce off some of the ideas to people from, as you know, that we've got 2 members from Christchurch, 2 from Bournemouth, 2 from Poole. They're bouncing their ideas off of us to see how hard we scream when they suggest something or otherwise. And already there's been a bit of that. And so that is what we do. I see Nick Perrins is on the line at the moment. He's gone. He's gone. Maybe he didn't want to speak, but I think, does that answer your question? No, I can't be any more specific than that, because that's the remit of the working group. It's really to give a platform for them to bounce these ideas.
And the timeline for potential first consultation?
I couldn't tell you that, but the aim is to get a local working plan. I think it's within 2 years. I see Nick Perrins has appeared. Can you comment on that?
Yes, certainly. I missed the first part of the question, so apologies for that. But in terms of timescales, obviously we got the member working group, which is really helpful, working quite well, very well, and officers working behind the scenes to produce the evidence. In terms of consultation, we want to go out this year. So haven't got any specific dates, but middle part of this year, go out for the next stage, start asking questions around some of these strategic issues, get views from the public. So yeah, I think it's really quite important for the council to go out this year to really get into the conversations around densities, locations, all those key strategic questions.
Thank you very much. Just to answer your questions, Councillor Slade, thank you very much. I see Councillor Howell has got his hand up at the last minute. Can we get this in fairly quickly, because we do need to close the meeting?
It's just a process thing. I would have thought the purpose of the working group is not to, advise or support the officers. It's to report back to the Overview and Scrutiny Board, so that the Overview and Scrutiny Board can then issue its recommendations. Yes. So is that going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can assure you that we're not providing advice to the planners. If the working group decide that there's something that we've come to a point where the Overview and Scrutiny Board needs to be made aware of. It will make recommendations directly to the ONS Board, and they will then put their recommendations through to either the Cabinet or the portfolio holder or the Council or whatever. But we haven't actually got to that position yet. But it may well do, and it may well be in the at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, apparently we're looking at dates of meetings again later on this evening, but I seem to have a different crib sheet from everybody else here. But I think that does bring us to the end of this afternoon's business. Thank you for that, Mr. Perrins. And I'll see you all at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much.